All right. So what we'd like to explore today will be kind of in a general way. What are we up against? What is our opposition, and what kind of challenges do we face on a real macro level, maybe the 30,000 foot level? And there'll be a little history in here too. And so I wanted to start with what those two challenges are. Those two challenges are the brain and our opposition. And I bring the brain up first, and I always make a point of bringing things back to the brain because that's where everything happens, and that's where our we have to know how it works if we're going to be working with the brain. So just to go for some elementary, I guess, brain science, let me share a different screen and go to our high school neurology department.
Neurons communicate with each other, relaying messages throughout your body and powering all of your thoughts and actions. Neurons talk to each other using both electrical and chemical signals. Messages start as electrical signals traveling rapidly down a neuron. These signals are called action potentials. When they reach the gap between two neurons, the messages need some help to get across. The information is transformed from an action potential into a chemical message, which crosses the gap called a synapse. The release of those chemical messengers can trigger an action potential in the neuron on the other side of the synapse, conveying the message onward. Or it can quiet the message. This happens over and over and over. And with repeated activity, the synapse gets stronger, so the next message is more likely to get through. That way, neurons learn to pass on important messages and ignore the rest. This is how our brains learn and adapt to an ever-changing world.
So, okay, what we saw there, and this is, I think, important, and I like the picture of it because it gives you a physical manifestation of what we've been talking about all along. You look at how the connections at the synapse get stronger the more things are repeated. It is also true, they notice that the signal can weaken a connection also. And so that can happen. And so those two things are going on, and it makes perfect sense because in order to learn, our brains need to be able to sort out what's important and what isn't. And things that are repeated tend to be remembered more. And also importantly, those things that are not repeated or not mentioned often, those ideas tend to get weaker. The actual physical synaptic connection gets weaker. And so that is really why framing is strategic. The brain really doesn't want to change what it already knows, and it will actively and physically resist, electrochemically resist. Or maybe more correctly, the brain goes to what it knows and ignores conflicting information. And we like to use the metaphor of a pathway here. And we've used this in the workshops. You've probably seen it before. I just like this idea that you can see that the path that more people go down is the one that's easier to travel, and the one that people don't go down gets overgrown and difficult to pass. And that's how the brain works, and that's also our mission. Framing is strategic. Our goal is to widen the path to our ideas. And as we do that, and as we get more successful at it, the path to the conservative ideas will weaken. Now, right now, it's flipped. Right now, the conservatives have done such a good job of it that their path is the wider path, and we've got to get people to go down our weedy path. But we can change that, and it is strategic. And that brings up an issue here is that there are tactical lessons and procedures that you can use now 2 months before an election, but that's awful quick to turn people's brains around. I mean, we really have to focus a lot on getting out the vote. We have to, do our framing whenever we can, and make sure we follow up on it. We're all singing off the same song sheet, but we're not going to turn a lot of people around immediately. And so this is why we must do this all the time. All right, and then we
One,
mentioned that.
one,
Oh, go
just
ahead.
to, if I can punctuate one thing,
Yeah, yeah,
George, if you don't mind.
please.
With early voting, that we've moved the goalpost back a little bit because September 18th
Yeah,
technically is our not our deadline, but you don't want to approach somebody October 15th and say, "Hey, I'm running for office," or "I'm doing this," and they're like, "Well, that would have been good to know September 14th, 26th when I submitted my vote."
yeah. I think our GOTV, as it's called, right before, usually a week before the election, if not a few days before the election. I agree. I think that that has to be part of whatever we're doing on the phone and in all our messaging starting on the 14th here in Minnesota. And in other states, you probably have similar. To explain what's going on in Minnesota is that we have early voting or mail-in ballots can be sent in as early as September 15th. Is that right, Jason? Or 14th?
No, it's the
September 14th.
18th, actually.
18th, and also people can
18th.
go vote in person starting September 18th. Is that right?
Same day. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Great. Yeah. So we want to get people doing that, and I personally prefer to actually go someplace and do it, because I just don't trust what they've done with the postal service. But doing it early is important. And anyway, so that's let me give you a little history behind what we're up against with our opposition. In 1971, this guy, Lewis Powell, who also went on to become a Supreme Court justice, wrote a memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And in this memo, he says, businesses must learn the lesson that political power is necessary, that such power must be assiduously cultivated, and that when necessary, it must be used aggressively and with determination, without embarrassment and without reluctance, which has been so characteristic of American business. And he goes on to say, strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through united action and national organizations. And I don't know if you've read this at all or know much about it, but this really was kind of the shot across the bow or at least maybe the catalyst for what is the current conservative method of communication and their plans. The idea was that business didn't have enough power in government, and so they needed to get formed together. And this was all supposed to be on the down low. It was all, in fact, part of the deal in another part of the message is that this does not need to be advertised. We should stay, just do what we're doing and just do it quietly. And though we know about it, and voters have a vague notion that it's going on, nowadays that power has grown because it has the cloak of dark money, which was those laws were specifically passed to hide the money trail. But it started with this guy and the fact that business wasn't getting enough power. And Lisa can put some links into that document, which is called the Powell Memo to the U.S.
Yes,
Chamber of Commerce. And then also there will be one to another memo coming up.
And I have added those to the chat. They were also in the email that I sent out, but I'll add them back in again a little later for anybody who joined after I put those in the chat.
So that letter set off a flurry of very intense activity on the right, especially with the help of media conservatives like this guy, William F. Buckley, who, even though I don't agree with him on anything, was the single most interesting person to listen to. He's a very intelligent person, probably had the best command of the English language that maybe anyone did. Too bad he wasn't on our side, but he and a small group of very, very rich investors spent billions developing propaganda, sending young people to college, building think tanks for them to work in, having them get into economics departments. That was also aided by this group of people endowing economics chairs and fellows at various economic departments all over academia. and then making all of these people available to the media as experts. And even though the experts are on TV, I don't know that the news media or everybody else really understood that a lot of these experts on economics and on other things were really coming from the right-wing think tanks. I mean, so some of that was known, but with the clever naming, it wasn't always very obvious. So this whole effort began an asymmetrical messaging war, which today is founded by the Kochs and others. The group of people that's funded it has changed over time. The Kochs right now and the Edelmans and other such people have been part of this group. They meet every year and figure out how the money's going to be spent. And they're around and they're more powerful than ever. They've also built, if we can believe some of the journalism on this, the database that they've built on Americans is the most sophisticated one yet. It beats our NGP van and other things that we use. So they're really on there. And notice that since using science in messaging is relatively new to us and not all that widely applied, that the GOP really has had a head start not just on the messaging but on the funding of it and the organization of it and benefiting from the power of it. So let's go to another guy. You probably recognize him. Things got pretty nasty when Newt Gingrich showed up. He and one other guy are probably the more responsible than any other two people for creating intentionally the huge divide in our country. Here's the other guy. This is Frank Luntz, who, if you look up some videos, he's a smart guy. He seems like the kind of guy you want to have a beer with. Frank Luntz, though, basically came up with the messaging plan, and he's quite a genius on this. He really gets it. Oddly enough, he will give his expertise to anyone who pays him. And it's interesting, he was on a panel with Drew Weston and George Lakoff, and the three of them were talking about messaging. And somebody asked the general question about, well, what should people on the left do if the conservatives are so good at it? And actually, Frank Luntz jumps in and goes, "You should be listening to Lakoff." And it was kind of crazy. But anyway, he and Gingrich set out to accomplish two goals. One was to continuously demonize liberals, and the second goal was to keep them from passing any legislation, no matter what the cost. And Mitch McConnell carries that torch today. I want to give you an excerpt from the GOPAC memo. The GOPAC is the conservative PAC, and a memo to that PAC, which is really meant for the incoming members, the freshman members of Congress, many of whom were kind of elected in I don't want to say a landslide, but in a very big shift over to the right into the House. And Frank Luntz encourages people to refer to Democrats in these ways. I've just bolded a few of the words in there, and I'll just read a few. But decay and failure, sick and pathetic, traitors, betrayal, devour, destructive, anti-family, flag, child, jobs, excuses, corrupt, selfish, shame, disgrace, bizarre, cheat, and obsolete, among other things. These were words, single words that were put out, that Frank Luntz listed out. You'll see it in the memo if you download it and look at it. And it was meant to paint us in as bad a light as possible. And from what I can see here, in using really loaded and unfair words, which didn't matter to them because these words were very powerful for them, and it worked. I find the name of this memo to be real telling. It's down underneath my chin here. Language, a key mechanism of control. That's about as ominous and eerie as you can get. And this is part of it. And there's a little more to the memo, but not a whole lot more. I think it's just a few pages. So I encourage you to read it and see where they're coming from. It's also a quick lesson in framing. So can you imagine, after 50 years of GOP propaganda, and certainly roughly almost 40 since this memo came out, how strong those synapses are in people's brains in terms of the conservative messages. That they've been getting them out there for a long time, and people's brains are kind of built that way. And again, much of this happens unconsciously. We brought up the simple example of tax burden or tax relief. And that is something that we find liberals using all the time. And it's not a good frame. It was chosen in order to paint taxes as a burden rather than a duty. So that's how strong these things are. They get into your brain. You don't always realize it. And we will. It's like the word climate change was a term used by scientists. And so was global warming. Everyone was calling it global warming, and Frank Luntz noticed that was doing really, really well. And so he said, we'll change it to climate change because the climate always changes. And that will put the stop into the progression of the use of global warming, which was working, and derail it. And it kind of did. And all of us, I still find myself catching myself when I say climate anything. I prefer climate crisis, but then it's important. I think Hobie knows that we need to also have have positive visions of the future, give people hope that something can be done about this and that they can do something about it. Because if we paint things as unsolvable, then people will just give up. So, but anyway, consider here what all of this did. Once Democrats were dehumanized, it got a whole lot easier to be mad at them, and also once the propaganda, which some of it was aimed at us, but much of it was aimed at the conservative base. It was designed to cause division and hatred, and those Republican voters got pretty up in arms. We had the Tea Party show up. Then when Trump got elected, we see a number of really extremist right-wing folks coming out from under their rocks and recruiting new people. And here's the curious thing that happens when that happens. The Republican voters who now have bought into this propaganda, who use the hate words, who use the things that the methods to make Democrats or liberals appear to be terrible people and dehumanize them, those voters started to believe that they actually had some power, and they figured they had license to elect even purer ideologues. I mean, think about it. When you ask your base to go with these social issues and talk about how pure people are with those, then they may choose people who are even more pure ideologues. And of course, we know whenever purity is demanded, people will fall short. And that resulted in the election of ever more extreme candidates, to the point where a number of prominent Republicans now, as you've seen, are endorsing Joe Biden. They've left the party. They're very confused about what happened. They don't seem to have owned up to the fact that it was their methods, Frank Luntz methods, Newt Gingrich's methods, and Mitch McConnell's that caused the situation in the first place. Michael Steele, if you see him on TV, seems, completely unaware or unable to explain what happened, but, it's pretty obvious. What ended up happening is control shifted from the controllers to the controlled. The conservative voters ended up going extreme because they figured, well, this is what you want, so we'll go with with those people holding extreme views. So the Republicans kind of lost their party. It got taken over in a somewhat bloodless coup of their own making, hoisted on their own petard, if you will. And we have a similar blindness. We for many years have seemed only vaguely aware of the psychological war waged against us and against voters and against the Republican base. So we characteristically respond with shock, but not true understanding of what's going on. And we haven't made the use of psychological knowledge part of our messaging culture. I'm not talking about any of you, because many of you have done the workshop, and we've done these, and I've read books. But until recently, using the science was somewhat resisted nationally. And people like Lakoff tried to break in and talk to folks and didn't get far. It's only in the past maybe 5 years to 10 years. I think since Don't Think of an Elephant came out, that which was a long time ago, 2004, that people on the left really started to think more about this. It's still not a main part of our culture, but it's getting there, and thanks to you and everybody else. So, uh, so whereas the Republicans built a foundation for their ideas by manipulating the voters, the very voters who eventually took their party, we haven't done that, and I think we need to do that by applying the same science with honesty and integrity. So that's just a little bit of a history of some of it. There's more to it. I recommend reading. Nancy McLean has a book, Democracy in Chains. Yeah, interesting book if you really want to know how the dollars and the dollar people and that whole group that formed after Powell's memo. It's a really interesting history of that. It explains a lot. When you read it, you'll be going, "Oh, now I see. Now I see it." You
It
know,
is a
we've
really
had to
good
reverse
book.
engineer it. But Clara,
Let me just mention that the Clean Elections people are going to have a big Zoom conference, and Nancy McLean is going to be the
oh,
speaker sometime in September.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, when I get the details, I can forward that to you.
Yeah, she's pretty good, and as a maybe an indicator of the power of that book when it came out, she was just trashed by Republicans. They called her, not a scholar, made terrible mistakes, all sorts of other. They just trashed her big time, which again is a sign that there's something there. She hit a nerve. So
Yeah, she's very good at pinpointing that the basis of almost all of it is racism.
yes, very much so. Yeah, I think she said this was really a reaction to Brown versus Board of Education. Started in Virginia, and places like George Mason University were basically, which was like a strip mall kind of college, and they turned it into this big college and it became the big center. And she only found out a lot of the details of this when she went there to do some research on one of the founders of that group, and they led her into a room with all sorts of stuff that apparently nobody had really cataloged or gone through before. So she saw a lot of this for the first time and didn't mention it to anybody at the university because she wanted to get as much of it down as she could. But very interesting story. So any other questions on that or any other observations? I know we've all seen what's been happening, and does this put things in a new light? Maybe.
Um, I'm thinking I recently read this Robert Reich book, The Common Good,
Great book.
and he actually feels that he says, well, you might say the left really started the changing the rules of the game from concern for the common good to whatever it takes to win, and specifically the Robert Bork hearings, because he says he knew Bork and felt that he didn't agree with him, but he was a smart and upstanding guy, and they threw the book and all kinds of rumors and stuff at him, and that was the beginning of the take no prisoners attitude, which is
On our side.
now in both sides. Now we certainly have it on both sides.
Yes. Yeah, and which is also another great book. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we certainly have done these things in the past, and our hands aren't clean. But I don't usually like to say that much because right now the scale is so off, is so asymmetrical, so tipped on the conservative side. Hobie, you want to say something?
I was just going to say, you, technically you're right. The left has done certain things, but I think it's a false equivalency, and we hear that all the time. Oh yeah, well both parties do it. It's like saying there's on both sides of the Charlotte, event. I'd be careful about. I'm not saying you were doing that, but I'm saying we all fall into that trap of going, oh yeah, both sides do it. That's what it is. And I just be careful and challenge back on that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know, Becca, because you do point that out. It is important to know when we do it, so that we can think about what we're doing and maybe not do things that we shouldn't. But yeah, I think Hobie's right. The asymmetry of it. I mean, our that particular issue, I felt was it came about because it was a tactical response, which Democrats are very good at tactical responses. What do we need to do right now in this moment to win this one thing? And that was chosen at that point. The conservatives, they go, what do we need to do every single day, year in and year out? And what do we need to do to fund it and make it work so we can get our ideas across? And they're way better at that than we are. And so I don't, I generally don't mention well, we do it too, because it basically tends to make both sides appear to be equal in what they're doing.
There's also the aspect of, especially right before the election, you don't want to go there now. If you want to improve the party after you win, that would be great. But the division is one of those. I mean, the Russians love that.
Yeah.
The more division they can, and the more depressed they can make voters. It's like, oh, everybody's a crook. I'm not going to vote. That's all bad stuff.
Exactly. In fact, I have a kind of a few common propaganda tricks that are used by Republicans, and one of them is making politics toxic. They a good deal of the negative advertising, the name calling, the shocking things that are said, the nastiness and the lying, is designed to suppress turnout, because it does. When there's a lot of that going on, people will say just what you were saying there. It's, they're all the same, or I'm disgusted with all of them. Mm-hmm. Why vote at all if all they're doing is fighting? And the conservatives do this because they know that it'll depress voting. And they may do it in places like here in Minnesota's 3rd District, where we turned the tables for the first time in 50-some years, where the Republicans had always held that seat, and we hold it now. We've got to hold it again, and they're going to come out swinging and trashing and getting negative. Even though negativity hurts both candidates, if it hurts the Democratic candidate and depresses voting, it'll hurt us more. So that's important. There are a couple of other propaganda tricks that come out. We talked about projection before, so I won't go deep into that, but just the idea that projection is when you project what you are doing onto your opponent in order to deflect blame away from yourself. And the interesting thing about really effective projectors, I'll call them, they project their weakness onto their opponents before their opponents charge them with it. They're the ones actually doing it. Like right now, Donald Trump is accusing Joe Biden of fomenting violence and lawlessness, and Democratic mayors, when in fact the people who've shown up to cause a lot of the violence are right-wing extremists. One young person drove up from Illinois into Kenosha to shoot people, or at least to get tough on them. And so, but they do it. They try to do it first. They're pretty good at anticipating what we might say about them, and then turning it around as quickly as possible and saying it about us instead. And when they do that, then yes, we turn around and we say, well, no, that's what you're doing. But now everything's equal now, right? Again, you have it's both sides are doing it, and people don't look at the scale between them. I can't get my hands here. You get the idea. And so. But again, projection gives you information. If you're a candidate, look at what is being projected, because the Republicans tend to telegraph the greatest weaknesses when they project. So it's a good thing to know. And there's nothing wrong with you simply leveling the accusation back at them. It's you kind of have to tell the truth on this. And calling out the reality is important. If what they're saying is not true, if it's You have to call that out. Use your truth sandwich, like we talked about, but do it in a way that illuminates their actions and the negative effect of those actions on people. Make sure that what you're doing is as often as possible showing the negative effects of what it is they're doing, so that real people are being hurt by these things. Any questions on that one? We've done projection before, so there's something kind of similar to that, and that's distraction. You'll hear Republican candidates using various ways of distracting the listener on TV or the voter who's watching the tube or listening to the radio, to distract them from what the real issue is. And the distraction does that and also wastes time. The idea is that they're tying up any kind of airtime with something that is not the real issue. They're distracting in order to keep you from seeing what is really going on. We see this with Trump all the time. Something bad comes out for him, and they've got a whole stable of weird, strange, and absurd ideas that they can release every time something bad news comes out about him in order to distract. And the whole idea is to keep you off your message, to eat up the time, to suck all the air out of the room. So the best defense is to not take the bait. And then again, that truth sandwich is pretty good, which is saying that, again, you say what the truth is, then indicate the lie, but preferably without using the words that your opponents has used, and then go back to the truth. And if you can, repeat it again. So that's pretty important. There's also one other I'll do, and this is the straw man. This happens quite a bit also. The straw man propaganda technique is misstating your opponent's position and arguing vehemently against it. So basically, they've set up, they've set you up and painted you as something that you're not. So this is a type of distraction, and a trap you can fall into is to argue with them. And while you're arguing with them, you never uncover the real issue, which is so important. Whenever you see one of these propaganda techniques coming along, understand that they're trying to keep you off your message. So try to figure out where you ought to really be. And so those are just a couple of things to think about there. And I don't know if you have any comments, any questions?
Hobie listed a series of Trump distractions that he's been using lately. He said he could postpone the election, threaten to send police to polling stations, sent secret federal agents into cities to attack peaceful protesters, and tried to sabotage the post office to suppress the vote. Those are just four of probably in the last couple weeks that.
And if you, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, and if you go back and look at when those things were announced, it's probably pretty. You'll probably be able to find something they wanted to have you not pay attention to at that very time. So, but yeah, this is also what we're up against. The things that Hobie said in the chat are very, very concerning to anybody who wants to preserve our democracy. Let me get you a couple of quotes from Lakoff, which I kind of liked. Framing is about reclaiming our power to decide what's important. That's our power to decide what's important. Framing is about making sure we set the terms of the debate, using our language and our ideas. Conservatives have beaten progressives at this for decades. It's time for a change. I agree with them. But again, taking back our power as liberals. And also, I push this a little farther and talk about citizen power. What's a democracy, after all, then? The ultimate authority residing in the citizens. And citizens get to make decisions about what they want to do. And it's tough nuts if Walmart doesn't like it, or some other large conservative group doesn't like it, or some company. We get to decide what we want to do and what makes sense. So, for example, if we want Medicare for all, or we want whatever version of universal coverage we get, well, that's just too bad for the insurance companies. Bummer for them, But we can make that decision because we have the power to make it. And notice that the conservatives quite often will make sure that they paint government as other. It's not us. The government is this other thing that controls us, rather than the government is us. We send people there, yeah, our representatives, but we have power to throw them out if we want to. So anyway, that was a quote I liked from Lakoff. Here's another one. There's a place for angry response and outrage. That's only human. But we also need strategic action to make sure every passing day fuels positive action towards progress. And I think that's really important. This needs to be part of our culture. He's talking about that positive action towards progress is really the messaging strategies that he talks about, that we've talked about in here, and that others talk about. And we have to do that. And I shorten this up and say this needs to be part of our culture. Liberals need to be doing this and say that the only way we're going to build our worldview in people's brains and maintain it is if we make strong, effective messaging part of what we do every single day, and that we check each other on it and we practice with each other. That's the way it's going to go. One last quote from Lakoff is just down in here, again, under my chin, where I keep all good things. Positive persistence beats negative resistance. Just a quick way to say it. So that's kind of the presentation, and let's open it up for questions or comments about anything, whatever. So if you want to talk about an issue, we can talk about that too. Fred and Becca, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this.
Kobe just.
Oh, and Hobie went to. Fred?
I'm Go ahead, Fred.
Oh, well, my thought was, yes, keep focused on what we want or our side, but when Trump attacks Biden and says, oh, Biden wants to defund the police, which is obviously not what he wants, what should the response be? Just for Biden to just reiterate his position?
Well, I thought what he did today made some kind of sense. There are times we have to defend ourselves, and I think that's important. And I would put it to you that it's maybe the job of the candidate under attack like that to say what the truth is, and that truth sandwich idea again. And that's important. He's not the only one communicating, though. And then he does, like Nancy Pelosi. I don't know if everyone's here seen the video. It's on the website. But Nancy Pelosi is an expert at not answering questions she doesn't want to answer and at getting what the real issue is. And I think Joe Biden is pretty good at that, too. And he'll get back to his message. But he's also, I think, it's really tough. We're up against, we're not just up against somebody we disagree with. We're up against somebody and a party that's out to basically undo democracy. And so we'd be irresponsible if we didn't call that out. But that doesn't mean the rest of us can't also always be talking about the positive things that we have. Give people that vision to think about. Give them some hope for the future that these things can change. I like saying it doesn't have to be this way. Or if you're talking about COVID, it didn't have to be this way. And things like that, and then you can use some of the other things we've talked about, like future pacing, or basically telling a story about what the future might be. Imagine a world where everyone can vote, and voting is protected for the sacred right that it is, or things of that sort. Putting this into a future thing, you can go. Especially works well with climate, in that you can talk about what the future would look like if waters were clean and the air was clean and all that. Did that answer your question, Becca?
Thank you.
Okay.
George, this isn't a framing question per se, but it has to do with distractions. And it seems to me like we thought the election was going to be cover issues like Medicare for all or health care. And it appears now that, and we thought it was going to be COVID, and there's a strong message behind COVID, but it appears now it is becoming a uprising versus law and order, a chaos versus control kind of thing. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on framing around that, because it's a really dicey situation, and if we don't message it right, we will put Trump right back into office. So the question is, how do we underscore our own values here and position them, for what they're actually doing there?
Yeah, and it's kind of always an issue in elections where sometimes events can just take over. There's only so much bandwidth people have for thinking about what's, or for what's present in mind. And at this point, and it's been COVID, but boy, the Black Lives Matter movement has really taken center stage, and rightfully so, in terms of history. That any time that we can talk about social justice, that's important. But this popped in there, and now because the Republicans figured the best way they can get, or at least extreme right wing groups figured they could poke this thing and really, or pour gas on it by going out there and literally pouring gas on buildings, or breaking windows like Umbrella Man, and or running up with guns at all of these places. There were people with guns in Ferguson. So this is a tactic they've been using for a long time. And how do you deal with that? How do we get it back on track? I thought the convention, at least for a few days, got things back on track. That helped a bit. But Trump is a master at the news cycle. I agree. I think it's very, very dangerous. We still have to talk with voters about positive things, about what our policies do, and all of that. And to be honest, it's still something I'm working through. I know this, talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and that social justice. I'm looking a lot to people who, like Ibram Kendi and others, who are because I'm still learning to be an ally. I'm still learning more about my own white privilege, and how do you talk about that with voters who are not going to be as, shall we say, woke, or I hate to use that word, but who aren't as woke, because it's not going to fit in their heads at this time. In 2 months, we're not going to turn them around on that. So, we have to bring it back to other basic values.
I would kind of reference you towards the Anat Shenker-Osorio race class narrative.
Yeah.
And I have one example of her messaging. Her messaging tends to be a little long. If you indulge me, if you give me
go for it.
30 seconds, it just says, no matter what we look like or where we live, most of us want our families to be safe and whole, communities to be vibrant. So that's the vision, okay, or the values underneath, the family values underneath. But the people entrusted to serve and protect our communities target, detain, and even kill Black people like George Floyd, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, and many others. All the while, a handful of politicians throw out lies to divide us. They know that if we've made to fear each other, we'll look the other way, while police officers meant to uphold the law, harm our communities, and elected leaders meant to govern in our name hand millions to corporations to militarize local law enforcement and deny resources for the schools and health care we actually need. We are coming together from cities to suburbs to towns to demand and insert your call from action so that communities are safe for every one of us, so that resources we pitch in for together create the schools, services, and care we all need. So it's a little bit of a pivot, but it's trying to get to the values, calling out the dog whistle or the motivation behind it, and then coming back to the vision of what we had. And it's not a frame per se, but it tries to pivot and identify what's going on. And I think that's the most important thing, is to identify.
They call that an architecture, not a frame.
Not a frame. It's an architecture. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. But I was just thinking, because I do some of that training myself. Law and order is a dog whistle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
So that,
code word.
Anat says you got to call out the dog whistles, and educate people that, you know, they're using that racist. Sometimes it's pretty overt nowadays.
Yeah.
It's not as subtle as it once was.
More and more every day.
Yeah. But I think the study that what's his name? Ian Haney Lopez. Most people do not want to be thought of as racists.
They don't. You're right.
So you can still appeal to that. It's a little difficult though, because, you know, if you don't say it just quite right, then they'll just turn around and say, well, you're the racist, you brought it up.
Which they're going to do anyway.
Oh yeah.
You know, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to say whatever they're going to say because they don't message with honesty and integrity like all of we do, right? Like all of us do.
So a couple things. One, before we move off of this, then Kathy has a question. So Hobie, where did that come from? Did you write that, or was that somewhere?
George, some stuff. I do some work with MN 350, and we are adopting the race class narrative kind of as a baseline for some of our messaging. And there are good handouts with respect to policing. There's COVID. There's a handout on climate. So it gives candidates or anyone, if you follow that architecture, I think that's what you called it, Clara. If you follow the architecture, it really is pretty effective because it's calling out the dog whistle, but it's also relying on our core values up front and emphasizing those. The race class narrative is just trying to show cross-racial solidarity in what we do. And it kind of brings me, I don't know where you're going with this, George. There's another thing, and it's not necessarily a frame, but there was an article in The Atlantic a while ago about liberals needing to be more, I don't want to emulate the right, but I'm going to say it as more patriotic, or trying to find the umbrella of being an American. And I wonder what you thought about that. You know, an example might be, you know, it's not American to divide us with fear. You know, the right has claimed freedom and patriotism and that sort of thing, but there's an opportunity. We seem to shy away from that. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I've wondered about that myself. It seems to me that we don't do it because we maybe like to think of ourselves as honest rhetoricians, and we're not going to stoop to using to attacking our opponent. But I think it's right now. I think it's important. I mean, because it's the truth. Right now, what's going on the right is a big danger to democracy. It's anti-American. If you do voter suppression, then you don't believe in democracy. You don't believe in citizen authority. You want to take that authority away from citizens, and that's the closest I've gotten, is that citizen authority thing. That by going to that and thinking of things in relation to that, it helps to illuminate it. I won't say that's fully formed answer, but I agree. We talked about going negative and all that. I don't know that it's negative if you're talking about the truth, and you're doing it with honesty and integrity. I think that's fine. It's important. Again, it's an obligation we have to voters to make sure that they know what we think's going on. Does that make sense?
I find the defund police, the whole point of defund the police is more democracy.
That's the point of it. It's a framing disaster, though.
Oh, I know. I hate it.
Yeah.
Yes. Some of the race class people say, well, fund our lives, fund the good stuff. But the other side has latched onto that. It was created by other people with other goals, and now we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
Well, and we saw it on protest signs, along with abolish the police. And unfortunately,
and a lot of really nasty stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, there was, and I totally get the anger behind it. It's just as a framing strategy, it was very poor. Not that everybody who puts a protest sign together is going to sit down and do a
I-
framing analysis.
Right, I
but,
think what probably happened is it got put on protest signs, and then the media picked it up, and then next thing you know,
Everybody's
it's
saying it.
what everybody's
Well,
saying.
it came out of the local community. I mean,
Right.
they wanted to defund the police.
Yeah.
And they've been using that for years and years, but they were never given a national stage. And when it hit the national stage, terrible. Just,
Well, and then
but then if you complain about it, people will say to you, well, you have to listen because these are, the community members.
we have to
So-
be careful in
There,
how
there
we talk
have
about
been
it.
good things that have come out. I mean, even the term or the organization, Black Lives Matter. If the best frame the opposition can come up with is all lives matter, we know we've gotten something
good.
over.
Yeah, that one was thought out by people who actually understand
Yes.
Right.
what they're doing. Where I think defund the police was more like local people specifically in Minneapolis saying, defund the police to get more members into their organizations, never expecting that it was, going to become the focus of,
And this-
the national.
And this is a perfect example of not uncovering the real issue. Because what did people say within a day of that phrase really becoming used all over? They said, well, yes, but what defund the police really means is we need to get rid of systemic racism.
Right.
Well, then you picked the wrong words. I mean, that's not good. But, it's getting to that real issue. So defund the police. Well, there are two things there. One is the police, that the police are the problem. The police are a symptom of a much deeper bit of prejudice and hate, right? And then the defunding puts the focus on the money. And so even Fund Our Lives also puts the focus on the money. The problem in this country isn't necessarily the money that's being spent. The problem is changing people's consciousness to accept people who don't look like them. And I like to, one way to do that is point at the millennials and say, look at what the millennials have done. Look at the crowds of people who are out there. People are amazed that the crowds had every kind of person in them. All those young people, they don't have built-in prejudice in their brains because they're online with kids from all over the world. They have gone to schools that are more, well, not necessarily here in Minnesota, but schools more integrated. They have friends, sports. Yeah, Minnesota is not at all integrated. We're probably as segregated as we were in the 50s, but that kind of thing, and getting to the real issue on it. So there needs to be some framing there, and I would like to see people like Ibram Kendi and other leaders talk about what that framing might be, see what they're looking at. Because it's hard to say, well, there's systemic racism. Well, what do you mean that? Well, there's a system, and it gets to be hard to, a more deeper conversation.
So Kathy has a question.
Kathy?
Yeah, I have actually two comments. Maybe some questions are in there. I would dare say that the whole racism issue burst into flames and traveled around the world based on video that was irrefutable. And I think that in the future, we're probably going to see technology like videos setting messages. So, you just cannot look at footage because it sneaks up on you for one thing, and so suddenly you're watching it whether you wanted to or not. And the other thing is it's horrifying and it's wrong, and everyone innately, gut-wrenchingly knows it. And so there is the strongest message you could get, and it wasn't until then that the whole issue of Black Lives Matters really hit the fan.
Yeah.
So, and then the fact that they capitalized on that. The second part of this to me is that, so they started with defund the police. But hey, all of a sudden now, people are suddenly saying, hey, basic income might be a good thing. Now that also comes out of the whole it comes out of the COVID-19 as well, but together they kind of make a new message and suddenly it's okay to talk about basic income. What the heck? So framing happens even when we're not quite trying.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that we have to see those things when they happen. It's talked about it in a very, I think the very first one of these, maybe not even, maybe it was in an email, but there's a word for this kind of time, and Fred and Beck have heard this from David Breeden, and it's liminal space, and they recognize this. When there's a great upheaval like this, there's this moment between what was and what will be, and you just know things are going to be different. And we're living that period right now. And things like Kathy's talking about pop up, and they happen where they couldn't have happened before. And this is where I think if we're really, really looking for the real issues at all moments, if we're ready to talk about them in a positive way, I think we can take advantage of those moments and push those things forward. I mean, yeah, universal basic income. I mean, when it gets to the point where the robots are, because we still have robotics taking over, we still have globalization. There are going to be a lot of people without jobs on the other side of this, and we need to be able to talk about things like that. I was going to mention just real quick, and then I'll get back to questions. Hobie had brought up Anat Shenker Osorio, and I'll get some links to that. For some reason, I'm trying to get it up on Amazon, and it won't come up. But she has written a couple of books. The one that, or the race class narrative, is something that Hobie sent me. That was like a pamphlet. And there's also a book called Don't Buy It, which she wrote, which is just brilliant. Yeah, Clara heard of that one. And she's really on top of things. Her website is pretty cool. It's not safe for work. Just pointing that out. Yes. Yeah. Who? Her name is Anat Shenker Osorio, and one book is Don't Buy It. And then, Hobie, I wanted to ask you on the race class narrative thing that you sent me. I think you said that they want that out there so that can be passed around. I can link to that. But you said they also have other ones, and is that on her website or other places?
No, her website is kind of opaque. I just tried to reach one of her people and wasn't able to do it. So
the people in Minnesota that besides you said MN 350, Faith in Minnesota is very big on that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Faith in
that's where
Minnesota?
I'm trained.
George, I will send you and Lisa the 4 or 5 exhibits that I have
Cool.
from them, and I think that'll get you 90% of the way where, and once you understand that sort of narrative arc or architecture, it's easier then to take other particular issues and put them into that context.
Yeah, she has a very interesting take on it. And
I just wish,
definitely.
I mean, we're talking about bad framing, and my favorite was the one that came out of the LEAP, which was called the People's Bailout. They wanted to start a campaign when we were handing out lots of money. Instead of, the idea was, let's not bail out corporations, let's bail out the people. But the frame is just completely back-asswards. It associates people needing to be bailed out, and that might be true intellectually, but bail is a bad term, and you associate it with jail. And we would have been better off using terms like, support the people or whatever, instead of doing that.
power to the people.
Power to the people, whatever. But it kind of brings up, George, that how do you get good frames out there? And how do you, other than what you're doing, how do we avoid falling into these traps all the time? As liberals, we seem to shoot ourselves in the foot every other day.
Well, what I think is cool is Clara's doing some of this. You're doing some of this. We've had other people on here who are doing it. There's folks in Michigan doing it. There is more of an interest in it. When we spoke to the state chairs last summer about this time, I think or in June, all the 50 state chairs and the territories, they all thought it was a wonderful idea. And Ken Martin, who is part of, I'm not sure if this video is going to work. Somebody asked me to start. Lisa did.
Oh, I actually no. I'm asking you to turn yourself on. You're like,
Yeah, it's not. I tried, and it's not
oh,
working.
interesting. Okay.
But it's growing. Unfortunately, it hasn't grown fast enough. I was hoping when I read "Don't Think of an Elephant" and started talking about this in the DFL, I was hoping that it would have taken off a lot sooner, because we're supposed to be the science people. We're supposed to understand this stuff, and it turns out we're not in this particular area. We're the science deniers, and it's been fighting to get people to do it. The Obama campaign did quite a bit of it. That was good, but it never became part of our culture. It's never been a top down thing. It's always been grassroots up. I mean, that's what we have to do it, because it's not being done at the top. I take some comfort in the fact that here in Minnesota, our state chair, Ken Martin, has been the only state chair who's put any money towards this. He's done it for 5 years. And he also happens to be the chair of the state chairs at this point, which makes him a DNC vice chair. And so I don't know what Ken's plans are for the future, but I can only imagine he'll have more and more influence at the national level, because he's just a powerhouse kind of guy. And if that happens, I think we'll see more support for this. And what I'm hoping to do, and Clara, please make sure I have your connection information, because I'm starting to get a group. I'm collecting my names, and I want to get in touch with people like you and like Hobie. There's Anat Shankar Osorio. She's the only one I know making a lot of bucks at it. But there's a guy in Wisconsin. There's a woman in Washington. There is some guy in Missouri, and there's other people who are doing this. Actually, the vice chair in Colorado has done some of this training in Colorado, and I want to get a coalition of people who do this training together, so that if and when the DNC actually decides this is important, that we already have a group of people who are doing it. We can point to them and say, if you're in Colorado, go here. If you're over there, go there. Or here are people available to travel to do this. So, it's a dream, but...
Well, Ken must be making some progress, because I can see every once in a while, even Melissa Hortman will say something, and I'm like, I recognize that language.
Yep. It's happening. Hobie?
I think the other thing that I think about on this is that when you're sitting by yourself, you can stew in your own head a little bit, and if you're reacting to frames that are already out there, you're too late. And there's a role for any of us to play. I try and focus on the climate issues and communications around climate change. But there's a role to create messaging as opposed to ask to be, involved in the messaging for a political party. So I just say, if we're going to do ground up, I'm mentoring here for a climate reality training right now, and I just sent a note to Al Gore that said, please don't call the climate crisis don't call it an existential crisis. We're going to change the way we want to talk about climate, and you're not helping us when you do that. And I haven't gotten the response back, but I imagine it'll be interesting. So, but I think sometimes creating a better term or a better frame to start with. Good frames travel, I guess, is what I'm saying. We should be putting them out ourselves.
And if it was part of our...
Where's Greg Layden? He would be, what's clicky and sticky?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Greg is something else. I really like him. He's a really interesting guy. But yeah, clicky and sticky. He's got a friend who wrote a book, again, it's behind me, but on going viral. And that...
Right, clicky and sticky.
Yeah, and he talks about it.
He made me read that book too.
Yeah.
That Joe, what's his
name?
Joe.
Yeah.
I forget, but there's who in MN350 does their Twitter?
I think a lot of people do.
Because there's
and
somebody that keeps popping up in meetings I go to, and I'm trying to remember his name. But yeah, there's something called the Narrative Justice League, which is coordinated out of SEIU, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And they try to anticipate and get a whole bunch of groups saying basically what Anand says.
It's backwards.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Joe Ron.
I know. I tried to mirror it and it won't mirror.
don't buy it. I have not
George,
finished
nobody
that
can
one. I
see that
started
because
to. But
your video isn't. Oh, now it's on.
I shared the screen.
Oh, okay.
And then,
Oh, now it's on. I'm sorry, but it's still bad.
yeah, Democracy in Chains.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yes, Nancy McLean. It's sometime in September. I know, because my Indivisible group is co-sponsoring it. So
You an Indivisible CD3?
I'm in that one, and also Plymouth area, and Plymouth area Indivisible is. Greg and I are on the board of that, so that's where I have a lot of interactions with Greg.
We're going to do some more promotion of this for coming after Labor Day, so I may be giving you a call. I've talked to Scott Ickes about it also, and he seems to want to do something. So
Yeah, Scott and I have done some race class narrative trainings in Indivisible, but I think it's always good to know. Okay, you can have this architecture, but you still need to be aware of framing and the language that you choose to use. I have to agree with Hobie that a knot is good, but it goes on and on. It's really hard to get her thoughts into a tweet.
yeah,
You can get parts,
yeah.
and you can put your tweets in order. But
I think the value of this, and I'll use MN350 as an example of what I'm trying to do with different grassroots climate organizations. About 2.5 years ago, I met with Brett Benson, who is their director of communications. And he was asking me, how can we train people in our different project groups, whether it's the pipeline resistance team or, maybe it's the transportation team. How can we train them to be better communicators? And I told them, I said, well, let's change this around. Let's figure out, instead of training people, it's the old, teaching pigs to sing. Instead, let's recruit people with marketing and messaging and advertising backgrounds into the communications team. And we started doing that. And now we have a team of about 14 different people who are script writers, videographers, messaging experts, that sort of thing. And we have a reach of people that have comms background of about 40 or 50. So what we do now is we actually do some training. We've taken these people and we've put them into the different committees and groups that are working on things. And we've tried to support them. And every month, one meeting a month, we have an open communications meeting where we talk about just the core messaging concepts. And I think that's working because they're a very social justice oriented organization, but not all their messaging comes out the right way. We're still reacting to issues. We're still, and that's one of my favorite pet peeves, is we're very issues oriented, and we're not telling stories well enough. We're not working on our framing and that kind of thing, and we could be, but we're starting to get there, I think. So that's the model that I'm trying to get other organizations to do.
Well, I think what both of you are saying is that all of that architecture is important. You got to figure it out, but that, as you said, Clara, framing is part of it, and it's kind of fundamental to it, and the skills in here are applicable to every issue. And so it seems to me that one of the reasons we haven't done as many issue ones is because I want to spend time making sure it's kind of drilling into people's heads the basics of how to do the framing. Because if you can do that, now you can apply it to whatever you want to. I remember, many of us here have read "Don't Think of an Elephant." And when I finished it, it was like, it wasn't like I was stupid and I didn't know some of this stuff, but I called it like I had a Swiss cheese brain. There were holes in it, and I'd never really had a complete picture of it. And then all of a sudden, this explanation of what was going on and that information just crystallized it into an aha moment for me. It was like I have a lens to look at this through that makes some sense. And some people argue with Lakoff about the nurture and parent and the strict father thing. We get a lot of pushback on that in the workshops, but you know what? It is a way of understanding it, and there are other ways of understanding it. We just like the Lakoff stuff because it's the only one that's comprehensive and comprehensible. It covers everything. You can see what's going on, and you can certainly then go off into Drew Weston, go off into others. Even what's his name? The what, how, and why guy. I don't know why I'm forgetting his name right now.
Simon.
Simon Sinek.
Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
Simon Sinek, and others, and there are so many other ways to do it. So that's why I thought this was a good introduction, a good entrance into this whole thing. So when you get out of that and you use our stop, drop, and roll, which is just a way to remember to think first, don't use their language, and message with values. And if we keep pounding that, people get those skills. The more you practice it, it just starts happening. And Hobie's been an expert on this for quite a while, and I can watch him do things, and he just says the right stuff because he knows what he's doing. He knows this stuff. So.
Hey George, I don't know what your agenda is here. I got another question.
You go. I haven't had an agenda for.
Oh, what do you think of the Lincoln Project ads?
They're really interesting. I mean, they're. Somebody mentioned that they said the Lincoln Project ads are being made for an audience of one, and that's Trump.
just to get him all freaked out.
just to unnerve him, and in that they are succeeding rather well. I think also because it's coming from Republicans, they're saying a bunch of stuff that we'd like to say, but we're too polite to say. As to how that is, I'm still unsure as to how that might affect voters. But I don't know that voters are their target. I don't know. What do you think about it?
I don't know. I just I'm glad that I think there's maybe I've been subjected to a frame of liberal elitism or something, but I do believe that liberals tend to think that the other side is stupid, and that we often, if you go on Facebook, I see a lot of ridiculing of Trump and or the right wing. And I don't know that ridicule is a great way to communicate. No. It simply I know in your core message, we like to say that if you're not pissing off some of your audience, your message is too milquetoast. But I find it, the Lincoln Project things make me feel good because they're saying things that I want to say, but I don't know what effect they're having on the general population.
I don't either, and it's good that it's coming from people who call themselves Republicans, or at least former Republicans. That's maybe a good thing, but like I said, I think it may just be that they're trying to get under Trump's skin, and that it appears to be working. What I take out of the Lincoln Project, more from again a 30,000-foot level, is that what I'm seeing is that there is a fairly large number of very prominent Republicans or conservatives who now have found common cause with liberals. I find that hopeful. You watch the one program Lisa and I watch in the morning, just because it's the place where that's happening more than anywhere else, is on Morning Joe Scarborough's show on what is it,
MSNBC.
MSNBC, and there you're seeing people who have been like guys like Steve Schmidt, John McCain's campaign manager. You see a number of other prominent conservatives sitting there talking about common cause with liberals. I find that hopeful. I think I don't think the conservatives are going to disappear. They're still going to be around. I'd prefer to deal with people like those guys who have a social conscience and who know that a lot of this stuff is very, very wrong and dangerous. So I think there's some hope for building democracy back if we can get rid of Trump with their help, and if they can take their party back over or form a new one. I don't know if they'll be able to take it back over. They might be able to form a new one.
I think it's an interesting strategy. I call it a kind of a carrot and a stick strategy. You're talking about your opposition. It was the theme of tonight. And I often find people are attracted to a positive vision of where we want to go.
Yeah.
And that within organizations, you'll find other people that will want to say, oh no, Trump's an idiot or whatever.
Right.
And you'll have this inter-organization conflict between how your message should come across. But if you can split out the negative from the positive and not tar yourself, and that's essentially what the Lincoln Project is doing,
Yeah.
then it's up to the left to create a better vision, because they've got somebody there outside that's external, that's, calling the kettle black.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm underwhelmed sometimes by the current presidential vision on the left. I'm not hearing enough of it. I'm seeing a lot of fundraiser stuff, but
Yeah.
I am not, feeling it. I don't know what you think about that, but
Well, I think the one thing that I thought worked fairly well was the convention, especially because they had regular people. So
Yeah.
you basically had stories of regular people, and that was good. I agree with you. I don't think they articulated in any depth at all any of the plans or where they were going with things. But at least the feeling part of it seemed to be there. You may need a little more substance, perhaps.
I just put in the chat a tweet that has the Lincoln Project, and this one I actually liked. There are a lot of them that I won't pass along because I don't want to be associated with them.
Yeah,
I like this as well. This was brilliant. Yeah.
I can pop it up here on the. Let me share it. Oh. Let me stop it. Rewind it. And
It's not even coming
But
up.
so often, I think you're right. If they can get it to their target, I can't get it to their target. The people I want to talk to would be turned off by that, I think.
okay, let's give it a shot here. Hopefully you can all see it.
It's just so sad. Just watching the Republican convention, and they're spewing this fear. Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. All you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back. Like, I should just be a coach. And it's so often reminded of my color. We got to do better, but we got to demand better. We protest and they send riot guards, right? We're trying to get them to protect us, just like they protect everybody else. You don't need to be black to be outraged. You need to be American and outraged. And how dare the Republicans talk about fear? We're the ones having to talk to every black child. What white father has to give his son a talk about being careful if you get pulled over? All we're asking is you live up to the Constitution. That's all we're asking for everybody, for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, that one was really good.
That was great.
Yeah, it's very different from most of theirs.
Yeah.
But the man who was speaking, I'm not a sports person, so I assume he's somebody really important. And when he says you don't have to be black to be outraged, you have to be an American to be outraged.
Yeah, he's
That did it for me. I thought that was great.
That was beautiful.
But that kind of goes to that American umbrella of wanting to unite us. What is American? We let the right define what patriotism or American or democracy even is. And I think there's something to that. I'll try and dig out that Atlantic article. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but
Yeah, I'd like to see it. It sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sometimes we think because Republicans have taken a word that we can't use it. So I very rarely hear a liberal saying anything about being a patriot, and so we have to start taking some of those words back. We can. It'll take a while,
Yeah.
But again, the end game of this is if we do this, if we can make it part of our culture, we do it all the time, then maybe not this cycle, maybe not next cycle, but over time it works. The Republicans have proved it. We can do the same thing. It's a little harder for us because we shouldn't use fear and we shouldn't lie, but it's never going to happen unless we start it. That's why I'm so glad all of you guys come to these because and are doing this work also, because the more of us that do it, the more we spread this around, the better it's going to be for everyone. And I don't want to
I
hold
think we're
people.
doing a pretty good job of taking back the word freedom lately. I hear it more and more coming from the Democrats. So that's an interesting one to watch.
Yep. And when you hear people doing things that are right like that, tell them. Say, I heard you use the word freedom there. You know how important that was in our messaging, that kind of thing, or get them to and talk to other people and say if you want to really know how this works and a way out, rather than asking what you can do, read one of Lakoff's books, come to these Monday night things. We're going to do the regular workshop that we do, the 3-hour workshop. We're going to be doing that on Saturday mornings. We haven't decided exactly when, but we're going to try Saturday mornings because I think candidates are going to start getting pretty mad that we're sitting on a Zoom when we could be phone banking. So I don't want to keep you guys here all night. We're at 8:30. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to, or want to talk some more. I'm happy to do it.
I know you say that the thing with framing is that if you've accepted the frame, the facts don't matter. And I was thinking, right now, the whole American health system where, if you have good insurance with your company, you're not going to lose it, which was what Obama said.
Right.
And now everyone's losing their job and then losing their health insurance. So,
Yeah.
but to me, the frame is that we believe that our government should provide services to keep us all safe. That's why we do have emergency services, environmental, so on. And I think that medical services should be provided in the same way that your public education is paid for by taxes, and so is the public health. Although we haven't enough money, and my feeling is that the way forward is, can you imagine if you didn't have to worry about the money when you went to the doctor? And that's the future we have if we go for Medicare for all.
You hit the safety and security frames on that, which is just great. That was a great way to do it. And you being an MD, that makes a difference. You're pretty close to it. So, and one of our heroes, by the way. So, yeah.
Well, I'm retired though, so whereas my sister is the anesthesia doctor in Maine, and so she's really up against it because that's a high risk if the patient is sick with COVID and you have to put a tube down their throat.
Yeah.
You're getting it.
Well, I still think you're a hero, and I'm going to persist
Thank
in
you.
believing that. So, yeah, that's a great way to do it. Yes. Oh,
I was interested in the visual frames of the Republican convention.
I didn't
I
watch it.
didn't think they could put any more flags into one space. There's some sort of density packing thing that they did. They couldn't get more flags up there. It was, and then to do it at night with the lights, and I mean, I was, in some ways, I was sort of, pissed off, but I was also, they also had a live audience, so people were clapping and that sort of thing. And I thought they did a reasonable job on the finale, except for Melania's dress.
And how about Trump's name in fireworks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a little ominous.
Yeah, right. Did you guys see there was a picture, I think it was on Twitter, where you see the fireworks up above, and then there are people like an indivisible group or something, and they have lighted signs, and it says, Trump lied, 180,000 plus people died.
I did see that.
That was a good picture.
And that was shown at the convention, or
No,
I doubt
it just showed up on
After.
Twitter? Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't show
So they weren't just caught in the background. It was okay.
Yeah, it was after the fact, but it was like,
Yeah.
here's the truth.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Does anybody know if there's been any bounce? I mean, I hear conflicting things, and I don't know whether it's self-fulfilling, wishful thinking on the left's part, but I heard the bounce wasn't as high as they would have liked.
That's what I heard. I heard, like, I think on MSNBC this morning or something, I heard there was almost no bounce for Trump. After the Republican convention.
I've heard 3 polls. One said there wasn't a bump for either of them and everything is the same. Another one said that Trump had a bump and Biden didn't, and another one said Biden had a bump and Trump didn't. It was actually down 1. So who knows? It's like, and then what are the questions being asked? I'm still kind of I'm leery of polls because just one word in a question. How are the questions framed? You never really know. And what is doing? Go ahead.
My guess is that only supporters watched the convention for each party. So how could it change anybody's mind?
That's what I think too.
But then it's good to know that there were more supporters watching the Democratic convention than there were Republican supporters watching that one. And that number's from Nielsen, so that's probably fairly accurate.
Fairly accurate.
Yeah.
What I really want to know is how much spread of the virus happened at the various in-person Republican events.
That would be interesting to hear. Like there was a COVID bump a week after that when Trump spoke, because there were 1,500 people in the audience, no masks, not socially distanced.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that there were 5 out of that group already, but I'm sure it will grow.
Yeah.
But it's a little soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the October surprise going to be?
Vaccine?
Probably.
That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, he's going to announce a vaccine that hasn't been properly vetted. And now, did you hear the latest one? I just saw today that his new, I don't know, the CDC guy or whatever, just wants to, just let it go. Let's just let everybody get it.
Herd immunity.
And let's just build up our herd immunity. Just let it go. Just take off all restrictions and let's just let everybody get it.
Doesn't matter how many people die, evidently.
Right.
That's what the British were going to try until they found out how many people would die.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sweden actually did it, and then I think they reversed course.
Yeah, they did.
Their numbers were pretty awful.
There is a yikes factor.
Yes, very much. It's like, a lot of people aren't going to get very sick, but then there will be a lot of people who die, though.
Well, and the other thing is, think about what's happened to our healthcare professionals. Kathleen's a nurse, or also retired. Kathy is a nurse.
Well, the other part of that, though, is didn't we just see a headline that said there's somebody who got it a second time?
Yep.
So maybe there is no herd immunity.
Yeah, that's true.
It has to happen a few times before we can say it's really true.
True, but this one was like the first time they kind of verified one. I think it was only one.
As far as verifying, I think so.
But I mean, I know somebody who's convinced he had it and would love to have some sort of little wristlet that he could go out and door knock. And I'm like, you're nuts. It's just not going to happen.
No.
Not in
Just
time for
because
this
you're
election.
convinced you had it, not with no proof.
So many people want their walking papers and
Yeah.
certification that says that they're clean forever.
Yeah.
I won't say the
Yeah.
person's name, but I know Fred and Becca know one person who said that exactly that same thing. It's Peter from FUS, you know. So we'll be doing our book club, but Peter mentioned that, and that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I worry so much about the health professionals who are going full tilt boogie. They've been doing that since, February or March. They're still doing it. This herd immunity guy is like, what, I can't believe all those people are still going. In fact, a lot of them aren't, some of them aren't. And that's really concerning. What happens when you completely destroy our healthcare system by burning out the doctors and the nurses? I mean, they're the people who make all this stuff happen, and the emergency people, and first responders, police.
We were a little short on both sides, doctors and nurses, for quite a long time prior to this.
Right.
And they're dying pretty quickly right now.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do a Lincoln project on COVID with respect to healthcare. I find it interesting the way masks have been connected with freedom and how quickly it was politicized. And it gives a good example of Trump calling the Democrats politicizing COVID, of blaming your opponent for the things that you're doing.
Exactly.
But I certainly think we could stand some better messaging around, wearing a mask or, sticking together by, staying apart, whatever.
Well,
But I would say too that the numbers really don't lie. That are, the numbers of cases and the numbers of deaths are pretty hard to refute. So
I thought that, but I'm going to challenge it. I don't think humans are very good at dealing with numbers. Intellectually, I understand that 183,000 people have died, but I don't know anybody personally that's died.
you
Okay.
will.
And so
you will, and it won't be pretty.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm scared to death. But what I wonder is that after a fear is repeated a number of times, it loses some of its potency. Mm-hmm. And I think we're better off. I mean, I'll take 180. Or I heard somebody frame it this way: more people are dying every day than died in the 9/11 attacks from COVID. Now we got a framework to connect that 183,000 with. We need to be able to make it more graphic. We need to be able to name.
There's quite
people.
a few graphics out there. I can't pull one out of the air.
I didn't mean graphics in a chart, because charts don't convince
No,
people.
graphics just like what you were explaining.
Okay,
There are other ones out there as well. I just don't have them at my fingertips.
I read an article.
So it's beginning to go that direction so people can understand it better. And it is pretty staggering, actually.
Yeah.
NPR said today that COVID was the third leading cause of death in the U.S. currently.
Well, I read an article too that about wearing masks and why aren't people doing it, and because I think it's because of some of this death seems to, if you don't know somebody who's died from COVID, and I do know somebody who's died from COVID, but I didn't see him die from COVID. It's just something that happened over there, and he was 85 years old, and but there's other things you can use too to get people to wear masks. They were specifically talking about getting people to wear masks. The fear of death is like something that's too far out there, and it's too it just seems too abstract to people. But if you say, if everybody wore a mask all the time, if everybody did, then we would be able to like go to sporting events faster, or put like a carrot out there, I don't know if that would be it, but something that seems more like attainable to people, like
keep more businesses open. That's what they want.
Something like
they
that.
Want to
Get
keep
the economy
businesses
back
open.
on
yeah,
track.
we get the economy open faster or whatever. But
I hear that stuff from the governor. He says stuff like that all the
Yeah,
time.
he's pretty good. Yeah.
Of course, if you don't listen to the governor because you're hating on DFLers, then
Yeah.
that messaging
Yeah.
isn't going to get through. There's an awful lot of people who are like, well, if I get it, I get it, no big deal. Well, I
big
think
deal.
now with the experience with the college kids going back, when it's going to start hitting the younger set and more younger people are going to be in the hospital or dying.
that might do something.
When it's old people, people can say, well, they were on their way out anyway.
They're gonna die soon.
But those
anyway.
college kids will take it home to their parents
Well, yeah, I mean, I live with my
and
grandchildren.
watch the University of Alabama. They are really in bad trouble.
They're in
right
bad shape. Well, most schools are going to be in bad shape if they do stupid things like that. But I mean, my daughter will not send her kid back to third grade because she doesn't want him bringing stuff home to me.
Yeah.
In the Osseo School District, which has approximately 20,000 students, they're going back on a hybrid model starting next Tuesday, and but what our son works for the Osseo School District, and a hybrid model means they go every other day, so there's not as many kids in the school at one time.
Kids
But
in
the
pods.
largest school that they will have is what they're calling the Online Learning Academy. 5,000 students have signed up for the online distance learning rather than sending their kids to school. So a fourth of the students won't be going back in person. So I just have to wonder, and I don't know if they might have even had to cap it off at some point there. I'm not sure. But it'd be interesting to see how many people want to send don't want to send their kids, and how quickly schools will have to shut down if they start getting a bunch of cases. They'll just have to shut down and go distance learning anyway.
And our son, he actually was very worried about it and only agreed to go back after he had a thorough explanation of what all the safety procedures were going to be. He works with, how old are the kids? They're
Middle school.
middle school kids, and it's a special ed class, so a lot of the kids just are not going to be wearing the masks or are not going to be careful about this.
But they have to.
But
And if they're not wearing a mask, they get sent home. So
right,
I think
but
the
still,
big concern to me is you can have all those things in place, and if you have what's called a sick building, it's going to go through the HVAC system, and
oh boy,
all I can think of is remembering back to Legionnaire's disease. You remember that one?
Exactly.
which came from the cooling towers with an HVAC system on
Right.
top of a building.
So I'll go back to my original proposal here, and I'm just, maybe we need a Lincoln project with respect to COVID messaging that has a political component to it, because we're losing that. We're losing that discussion on the national stage, I think.
Yeah.
Think about the Twitter that you just put up, and think about somebody talking about the people that they've lost and not understanding why we don't wear masks and why we can't come together as Americans.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just before the George Floyd murder, there was that naming the lost. There was a big project, that the huge list of all the names in the New York Times, and they were going to have on, I think it was June 6th, the plan was to have a COVID Memorial Day. Well, George Floyd took care of that. I don't know if that's going to try to come back or not, now that there are so many more deaths that can be attributed to COVID.
I know some of the news programs, at least Nicole Wallace, at the end of at the end of her program, she features one family who's lost somebody to COVID, and then it's like a couple minutes long, and it talks about who they lost, how it happened, so personalizes the COVID deaths.
Yeah. The plan that I heard about, that of course didn't happen, was to bring it to every little town or every state at least. One of the things they did in New York State was some big famous cemetery, and they had people put names of people who had died on the fence outside the cemetery and with big signs, indicating what it was. And they were, they were soliciting, will you do it for, say, Minneapolis but it deflated completely with the George Floyd situation. So I don't know if it'll come back or not. I do like the idea of what Hobie's talking about. I'm not sure who would be able to put together that high quality, gets right to you kind of messaging. It'd have to be somebody that had resources.
Lots of resources. I'm always amazed at the Lincoln Project, how they can, an event, something happens, and within like a half a day, they have an ad out. I mean, the resources and a very highly produced ads. So the resources they have are phenomenal
They have
to get that kind of stuff done.
They have a budget.
Well, and because they are Republicans, they probably are anticipating some things.
That's right.
It's like, we'll be ready for this one.
Yeah, they must. Because it's like they're ready.
I mean, it takes either there are plenty of, here in Minneapolis, there are plenty of video professionals around and script writers and such. It's just difficult, obviously that's how they make their living. And so, unless you can find very generous people willing to put in long hours to do it for nothing, you got to pay them, and we don't have the funding mechanism. On the left, when people give money, they want to give money to feed somebody or to support a candidate directly. The kind of outside things aren't done as much. I mean, there certainly are a number of organizations that are doing good in the world that liberals will give to, but messaging hasn't ever really seemed to be one of them that's gotten a lot of support. So I don't know. I'm just complaining here.
Just FYI, there's a group that I belong to called the Climate Advocacy Lab, and they had a fella come and speak on one of their webinars. He's an ex-advertising guy off of Madison Avenue, and he's put together a coalition of about 30 other marketing, advertising people to work on the climate issue, and appears to have gotten some financial backing.
Interesting. So, what was it called again?
The organization I belong to is called the Climate Advocacy Lab. I will get his name and information again, relay it through George and Lisa. But I was encouraged that he had a little bit of money. He was doing some videos, and he had a number of professionals that were working with him on that. So it's sort of maybe a mini Lincoln Project, but with respect to climate messaging.
And I was in video and video production for most of my career, and it's interesting. Even we did a video on precinct caucuses, trying to explain what they were and all that. And we had a talent person donate their time, and a videographer and a lighting person, and they all donated time. And the lighting took 4 hours just for one scene to get it right. But luckily, in a way, it's not as expected that it's as high production values now, because so much we see around telephones, and it's down, so you can do more. You just have to do the right kind of thing. If it's a phone quality video, you got to be showing something that's happening or that's live, and that's a little less scripted. But if you're having a person sitting there saying something directly to the camera with the intent purpose of communicating directly to that viewer using a script, the production values seem to you expect them to be a little more. The price of this has come down, and a lot of people are doing an awful lot with less money, so that's helping. I mean, we're not rich, and we're doing these. I know I'm not the most photogenic guy here, but we're getting something across, and it's working, so that's good.
Yeah, you don't have to have super quality video. I think the thing that we're missing in part that I liked about the Anat Shankar Osario, or however you say her last name, I just did a Trump on her. I should learn to pronounce her last name, but it is that the messages she's developed have been tested. And so many times we don't test our messages. I'm curious to know if the Lincoln Project tests their messages,
yeah.
because everybody thinks their own script or their own video is the greatest
Brilliant.
thing since sliced bread. And as we all know, you can get unintended consequences. So
Yeah.
teaching people how to test their messaging would also be useful.
But and you want your results to be valid, and that's hard to do with very little to no budget. But if you can, then it's a good thing to do. You might have some ideas on that, Hobie. I mean, even putting a focus group together, you'll hear stuff from people, whether it's 100% valid or not. You'd at least be able to get some feedback on things, and you might catch something that you did that maybe you shouldn't have done, or you might find out your message isn't getting across at all.
Yeah.
And that you can get a focus group together pretty quick.
One of the things that I have seen with Faith in Minnesota, their big success was greater than fear. But now they're saying, well, we have to move beyond that because it's not going to work the way it did before. So it's a moving target.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Staying
we're not
fresh
after.
is a big deal. Being current and fresh and new.
Right, right. So what I'm seeing from them a lot lately, and I don't know if this is firm yet. I think they're still working on it, but there seems to be we make the future, we make Minnesota, that sort of looking forward instead of reacting to, because fear, of course, is you still want to be greater than fear, but you don't want to use fear all the time.
Right.
So
they're moving to something that's hopeful, giving people at least a vision that the future could be different.
right. And one of the words that I hear them use all the time, and I'm seeing it used in a lot of other places, is thrive. You want to do things so that people thrive in the future.
Yeah.
Trying to think if there are some other.
One of the groups is using our beloved community, which seems to resonate pretty well with
Yeah, that's Isaiah. So that's the other part of Faith in Minnesota. One's a C3 and one's a C4, but they're the same basic ownership.
Claire, it's interesting that the messaging you're talking about is time-based. It's looking forward, and there's been some research done, at least with respect to climate, that when we say we want to, stop global warming for our children, that message resonates with liberals, but it doesn't resonate with conservatives. Or if I say I want to preserve and restore our pristine environment, that message resonates with conservatives more, and it's neutral or positive with liberals. So it brings up this thing that conservatives tend to be backward looking.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that's the right way to describe it.
Make America great again,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They
They
tend
do.
to look backwards towards things, and liberals tend to look toward
Forward.
the future and believe that the world is a dangerous place and we need to prepare for the future and that sort of thing.
So
I don't know if that's why I say when we get a message like that, testing it, because I don't know who the audience is, but if you could say maybe is there a way we could twist that a little bit so that it would bring conservatives a little bit more into the
what Anat would say,
yeah.
because of the research, is like 25% of people are progressive just because they are. 25% of people are, we'll say, conservative or the opposition just because they are. And that leaves you 50% who haven't made up their minds, and you can trigger either one way or the other. That's a lot of what her research is how to trigger the progressive mindset in these people that can hold bizarre, conflicting ideas at the same time.
The biconceptual people.
Yeah, and 50%. is a big group, it's encouraging to think that there are 50% of the people that you could actually influence.
Yeah.
But it's depressing because, as George has been saying, for 40 years, the other side has been influencing them. And now we've got this problem of how do you flip them over to what you want when all their little synapses are set by the other side.
Exactly. And it's tough. It's that's why it's strategic. It's a
And
long-term thing.
I always have very good intentions, but you really have to stop and not get caught up in the whole outrage thing.
Yeah.
And it drives me nuts that I'm on a lot of private Facebook groups that are supposed to be, liberals or progressives or whatever. And there are so many people there who are like, it's all over. We've been taken over by the fascists and it's just awful. Well, do something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's part of our role would be to say, they want you to roll over and die.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've just given in to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you stand up and fight back?
We try, but there's always this undercurrent of, that's so terrible.
There are also a lot of people who want to complain, and not very many people who want to do it. I know when I was in associate chair in CD3, Marge Hoff and I were trying to get people involved, and we did a pretty good job. We over there, we really built quite a coalition, but it still turned out to be a tiny fraction of the people. And it's like any volunteer organization. There's going to be just a few of the people who make everything happen. Everybody else is just perfectly free to, they feel free to tell you what it is that you ought to be doing, but they don't want to do it themselves. And I got so tired of it. Somebody come up and go, how come CD3 isn't doing this? And I go, well, because we only have so many people. You sound really interested in this topic. What can I do to help you make it happen? And either I'd never hear from them again or they'd do it.
But that's what an organizer is supposed to do.
That's all you can, yeah.
It's what you did. But there's, and I've only been doing this kind of stuff since 2016, because I was one of those people that was like, well, I don't need to participate with a party. I'll just go vote. I'll send money and I'll go vote. Dumb, but
now here you are.
yeah. So I'm making up for lost time.
Yeah.
I think everybody starts that way. Everybody's
it's
has
just
their awakening.
I don't know. There's lots to work with. We'll look on the bright side. There are many people to work with.
I think
50%.
too that there's a lot of untapped resources. Certainly, I saw an article. I don't know if it was in the Strib or somewhere else, but an article on Charlie Schultz and his Peanuts cartoons and how he brought in Franklin, the young black kid, and Franklin was welcomed by Linus or one of those. And it was a huge, huge deal. So, I mean, and also I heard that there was a campaign for something like, this is years ago, when people were reusing when addicts were reusing their needles, and they wanted them to stop doing that and come and get some clean needles that they were offering in somewhere like Seattle. And they couldn't seem to get their message across. Nobody trusted them in the government, but they put together a comic book on it, and people started coming in. So, I mean, there's some untapped resources. And again, I mean, certainly we're seeing the videos making a huge impact, where I personally wouldn't have believed that it would have happened like that. You would have thought that all those other people who died before should have made an impact, just like the school shootings and everything else. But here, a video. So we have some untapped resources that we still haven't.
The other part of the video, though, is you'll hear from some of the people in the black community. It's like they don't want to see that over and over again. because it's like watching a family member being murdered.
Sure.
Oh,
in
sure. It's
front of them.
traumatizing.
I mean, I only watched it
True.
once because, and it took me days to build up the nerve to watch it because
And
I knew
that-
I was going to watch somebody being murdered. I thought that was
But did you expect it to go worldwide? I didn't.
no, I did
I thought it
not.
would just be Minneapolis. That would be it. It would burn out. But it didn't. It inflamed the entire United States and went around the world.
It did, yes.
And I think it was because of the
pretty
length.
incredible.
I think it was because of the length of it, because you watched, the other videos are a few seconds on a shaky camera, and here it's
Right.
8.5 minutes,
Well, he's clearly being murdered.
and you're
It's
watching the whole. I mean,
Yeah.
it plays out over a longer period of time, and I guess it just feels different.
This
Yeah.
is another thing that Greg pointed out to me. It was like most of the others, people are shot.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
This is very different.
Hands.
Right. A shot takes a
It was
second.
excruciating.
But this is you watching him. Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's why it just feels it's so long and it's like so purposeful.
And that one shot where it's a young girl, I guess, who's holding the camera, but the policeman just stares at the camera
Right.
like, "You're nobody. This isn't
Yeah.
going anywhere."
Right. And there were so many opportunities for him to stop doing that, and he didn't. And
Yeah.
so it's just there's so many things about it. I'm sure it'll be papers written on this for 20 years about why
Oh,
it
yeah.
happened the way it happened, what and that kind of thing.
But some of the things, like, things will hit the news and you'll think it's brand new, but if you stop and look into the history of it, like, not defund the police, but in that same vein, like 2017 or something, some local group did a 150-year history of the Minneapolis Police Department, saying how
Same
bad it
things.
had been that entire time and how many times they tried to reform it.
Yeah.
So there was all this prior work being done that never got any credit, and then all of a sudden, when people started looking, there it was.
Right. Yeah.
And what's interesting is how many of these things have been around forever. I mean, just like you're saying, we did a project, my son and I did a project digitizing a bunch of old, we don't call them sermons, it's for First Unitarian Society, Minneapolis, and we the addresses by the minister back to 1910. And of course, being a minister, they're talking about life situations and political situations and social justice. And you read these things from 1910, 1920, 1930, and you could lift half of it right out, print it today, and it would sound just the same. It would be just as applicable.
Yeah.
It's a constant, maybe I'm cynical about it. I just think humans will always be this way. I don't know that we'll get to that Star Trek universe where, like Captain Picard says, yeah, we don't have prejudice anymore, and we don't have greed, and we don't even use money. We don't have greed anymore, and all this. And I think the Greeks had it. Human beings are human beings. Human beings are human beings. So it's a constant fight. ConnectionsLab.org